Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health?
Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I think our conversation today is going to be really exciting. I have as my guest Michelle Pitot. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified professional coach with a doctorate in multicultural education from the University of San Francisco here in my hometown. She is certified in metabolic psychotherapy by Dr. Georgia Eid, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and she is a licensed heart math practitioner. Michelle has over 35 years of experience across diverse settings, including addictions treatment, higher education, social and racial justice work, corporate leadership, and private practice. And she brings a uniquely integrative lens to healing. Her work connects the dots between metabolic health and mental wellness, helping people reclaim clarity, resilience, and energy by addressing the deep interplay between body, brain, and emotional experience. Integrating biology, emotional insight, and mind-body practices, she offers a pathway to healing that is both grounded in science and attuned to each person's inner wisdom. Welcome, Michelle. I already want to ask you 1,001 questions just based on
Thank
that.
you.
but I always like to start each podcast episode though with hearing a little bit about our guest and how it is that you came to be working in this area and doing this incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a good place to start. Thanks. Um, there's a couple of turning points in my life around my work and how I got where I am today with what I do. And the first is I initially got into this work like a lot of us do through my own experience. I was an undergraduate and I was really struggling with my own emotional and mental challenges. And through the help of my parents got me some help. And the folks who helped me were amazing. And I thought, that's kind of a cool way to make a living, right? And so I changed my major and I ended up getting both my undergraduate and my master's in social work from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, which is where I'm from. And then over the next 20 years or so, I worked in a lot of different settings, which you mentioned. And it was when I had left the Bay Area and I was living in Tucson, Arizona. And I had taken a position at a children's service organization. And it was a very small, tiny little local agency. And then it grew, and believe it or not, it eventually went public, and it was on Wall Street. And I found myself working with Wall Street investors, and I was this corporate executive, totally out of my comfort zone, really. But I was at a point in my life where I was on the outside living the life. I was flying around the country and I was doing this work, this very life in the fast lane kind of life. I had this beautiful home and family, and it all looked good. And what happened was one day I was going home and I got in the middle of a police action, actually, and my life was threatened by a carjacker. And in that moment, I thought I was going to die. And the fallout from that experience really threw me back to where I had been as a teenager. And in all honesty, while the outside of my life looked great at that time, I had not been working on my inside. I was living a very high stress, so the foundation was very shaky at that point in my life. And so, it makes sense to me that things crumbled. And so again, I got help. And this time it was different in that I really felt that I needed to go a lot deeper with my healing. I needed to look at more, I learned a lot more about trauma and trauma-informed care, and about how necessary it is to have a deep understanding of both big T and little t trauma, as we call it. And I started learning somatic methods. of healing, body mind work. Like, where do we carry our trauma in our body? And I've always, since then, but really always been really fascinated, and as a therapist, humbled by how emotional wounds live on in our body and not just in our mind. Yeah. And so I that whole experience for me, as I started using somatic approaches, I found myself in the world of what's called biohacking, which is just the practice of experimenting with yourself, like your own personal science lab, to figure out what works with your own personal and unique biology, right? There's just so much about that part of my life with biohacking, but what I'm going to zero in is the last couple of years, because that's when I got turned on to the work of two Harvard trained psychiatrists, Dr. Chris Palmer and Dr. Georgia Ede, who you mentioned, who I've gone through certification with. And their work revolves directly around the connections between metabolic health and mental health. So I got really very deep dive into their work, starting to learn how our metabolic processes are directly connected to mental health. And we can't really separate the two. And I guess what I'll say, I know we'll get more into it, but what I really love about the metabolic approach is it brings everything for me full circle, both personally and professionally. So it weaves together everything I've studied and a lot of what I've experienced, whether it's trauma work, nervous system regulation, somatic practices, coaching. Oh, along the way, I became a coach. I didn't mention that, but that's a whole other thing. But all of those things, I find it's a truly integrative path. I'm super excited about what I've learned both through my studies and my training, but also from the folks that I work with. I'm always so impressed by the courage and the amazing changes that I see people experience often after a long time, many years of struggle and not being able to really figure out how to put all the pieces together.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I love this work. And I'm so grateful there are people like you out there who are doing it. And that's why, part of the reason I even do this podcast is to try to get this information out there, because I think we're so limited in our perspective in traditional Western psychology and psychiatry. We are really limited in our perspective on what causes people to suffer psychologically. We call it mental health, as if the body and the emotions and the spirit are not part of it. And that implies that it's a brain thing, right? That a lot of mental health is equated to brain science. And even when they're looking at different disorders, they're looking at like what's happening in the brain, which sure, that's part of it, but by no means is that the whole picture. And it seems like, even in medicine, you go to this type of doctor, this kind of specialist who works with this system, and then another kind of doctor that works with this other part of the body. And yes, you have more integrative physicians coming into the world, thankfully, and we've even had some on the podcast, but it's still a very fragmented system. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. You got to the heart of the matter right up front. So it a lot more people are familiar with the term body mind work, or mind body, however you want to put it. A lot more people are familiar with that. And even in the face of that, what do people do? We automatically, if we have something going on with us, whether it's chronic pain or whether it's gastrointestinal distress, our stomach is upset, or we're having headaches, or we're having any kind of physiological concern, where do we go? We go to our primary care physician. And most of the time, they're going to have a solution. The frustration is that often the solution addresses the symptom, but it doesn't address the root cause. At the same time, if we're struggling with our emotional health or our mental health or our emotional regulation, we may seek out therapy or a mentor or a coach. And frequently in that world, we really are doing a lot of work on how are your thought patterns? How are you? What is your self talk? What about your self compassion? All of which are valid and necessary, right? And yet, if we're doing one here and we're doing one here, they're not integrated. They're not, it really isn't a mind body approach. It's a mind here and a body here, right? So, yeah, I think I initially, a turn in my in my work with the biohacking about really just looking at yourself as an N of one, and you're your own research project and trying to figure out, okay, I'm my research subject, what works for me and what doesn't. And in one of my paths, one of my turns, I learned about functional medicine, which is really the practice of functional medicine, as you're aware, probably is all about looking at root causes. And that's actually the work that I do a lot with metabolic healing.
Mm. Oh,
Root
I love it.
causes. Yeah.
Yes. And you're right. I mean, the typical answer is it can be very surface in the traditional approaches. Here, take this pill. Take this pill and then take these other 5 pills to deal with the side effects of the one pill that you started taking. I mean, this is really, especially in mental health, this, like especially with folks who are really struggling with more serious conditions, they're given, like, for example, really strong antipsychotics. Those create a whole host of metabolic side effects. And then now take these other medicines to try to manage that. And now you're, more likely to become diabetic because of it. I mean, even listen to the commercials on TV. My God, the side effects sound worse than the original condition that, that you're trying to treat. So, yes. So let's get more into this. Yes, I want to know more about, okay, so metabolic health. I'm not even sure people know what exactly that entails. Like metabolism, like what is metabolic health?
Yeah, great question. So again, yeah, exactly. When people ask me what I do and I talk about metabolic health, they automatically think about metabolism. That's the most commonly understood meaning of the term about, and people will say metabolism a lot of times is related to our weight, right? If someone has a fast metabolism, we're jealous of that person because they can eat everything and not gain weight. But my metabolism is so slow, I just look at a cookie and I gain weight, right? So people think of that with metabolism. But metabolic processes, it's way more complicated than that because our metabolic processes are basically all of the processes that it's like whatever we take into our body. So it might be water, it's air, it's food, light, even environmental toxins. Whatever we take into our body, how does our body then turn that into energy to keep our body going? And metabolic health, when we're metabolically healthy, it's about how well your body uses that energy. So when our metabolic system is off, you end up with physical and mental challenges. So including blood sugar instability. A lot of times there's other physical things. There can be chronic pain. There's a lot of things related to what's called insulin resistance, which is part of metabolic um, dis-ease or not being metabolically healthy. Excess weight, dehydration, chronic inflammation. So there's those physical things. And then it also is connected to what we're finding more and more is that lack of, not having metabolic health is connected to brain fog, not really being able to, like forgetting our words and forgetting where's my phone. Well, where's my phone, I think is universal.
Yes.
So I'm going to give that one a pass.
I'm not
But
going to apologize myself for that. Okay, good.
but even just directly affecting mood stability and our ability to emotionally self-regulate, if our metabolic processes are not functioning on all cylinders, it's going to affect all of those things.
So I think that some people are savvy to some of that, maybe a small subset. Like let's just talk hormones for a minute, right? Like or low blood sugar. Like these are really common things. A lot of people understand, oh, I get low blood sugar, I get hangry, um I can't think straight, I'm more emotionally reactive. We know with hormones that can be similar, that time of the month for many women, right? The fluctuations in our hormones can lead to mood swings and struggles, that look sort of mental health type struggles, but really, and then menopause is a whole nother story. So we know about that, but there's so much more to it, is what you're telling us, than just hormones and like blood sugar stuff. Like it's really everything, all the functions of your body.
Yes, it really is, which is why we have to, each of us, it's a very individualized approach. When I work with someone, the first place we start is where are you? Where have you come from? And where are you? And where do you want to go? Right. And it really needs to zero in on what are your challenges? what have you tried in the past, we can find clues in either what's worked, what hasn't worked. If it did work, how come you're not doing that anymore? When did it stop working? We have to really consider all of those things. I think relative to brain health, the brain is really an energy hungry organ. It's only, I'm not sure if I'm going to get these numbers exactly right, but it's only about 2% of our body weight, but it uses as much as 20% of our daily energy. And so, if the source of that energy is unstable because of our various lifestyle choices, really is what it is. If the source of energy to our brain is unstable, it leads to, if we have blood sugar instability, the brain just can't function well. And that's where anxiety, irritability, depression, lack of motivation, not being able to remember stuff, kind of all of those things come on a surface level. On a much deeper level, it's connected to a lot of other physical ailments.
Right. So I'm even just thinking about that in and of itself, right? Like for example, think of trends in like health, especially like around weight loss, because there's always like the newest, latest diet to follow, like the blood type diet or the Atkins diet or keto or the carnivore is sort of the latest one. But there's also that intermittent fasting. That's what came to mind when you were talking. It's like I've known people who've done really well with intermittent fasting and they've lost weight. They're like, I can think more clearly, I have more energy, and it sounds miraculous. And then other people are dying. They're, dying of starvation. They can't think straight. Their mood is low. And I'm just thinking, well, that's not for them. That's not the right, intervention for them. I'm not somebody who could ever do intermittent fasting. I'm the person who needs to eat every 3 hours or else, I've got the blood sugar stuff. So how can we debunk the myth that there's like one magical protocol for everybody, and then how do you help clients figure out what's going to work or not work for them?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a lot there, so I'll unpack it a bit at a time, and then we'll circle back to whatever I miss. Okay. First of all, the goal isn't to control the body. A lot of times, folks when they come to see me and they hear about metabolic health, they do associate it with metabolism, and they're like, "Okay, body, got to do this." And so it's all about I've lost control. And the goal is not about controlling the body; it's learning how to partner with it. I truly believe that we can't heal what we can't feel. And if we look at traumas that are stored in the body, it can come and partner that with a lifelong struggle with body, which happens a lot. I work with a lot of people that really live from the neck up. The body is almost just seen as a vehicle to carry the head around. And that might be because of betrayals. It might be because of various traumas. It might be because of weight or being body shamed for any number of reasons. I've worked with people who are body shamed for being too thin as well as for body shame for being large. And so I feel like when people come with a lot of different connections, not all good to their body, the first thing we really need to do is how do we create a safe place in our body in order to heal that? And so, and what you mentioned about all the different trends, in order to become metabolically healthy, there's a lot of different aspects of it, but the food is one of the biggest steps. It's, I guess, the quickest path from point A to point B is looking at nutritionally how we're fueling our brain. Okay. But I can't just prescribe, here's how you should eat or not eat, like you said, with intermittent fasting. I have to start really, like I'll ask someone on a very granular level. I'll ask someone when we're first working together, they have a pretty extensive questionnaire, because I really want them to think about their history and their relationship with their body. And in that, I ask them to tell me a 3-day food log. I also ask them to track certain macronutrients. And so what we're doing is we're finding a starting point, because just like with the GPS, You got to know where you're going. But if you don't know where you are right now, then you can't really start. So we have to figure out the starting point. And at that point, knowing, and part of that history and part of the questions I ask are, when did you ever like your body? When did you feel most, when have you felt best in your body? What makes you feel great in your body? When have you had a good relationship with food? Maybe a lot of people have a good relationship with food, and yet they're not making the greatest choices. And so there's that struggle. I went in a lot of different directions, so I want to make sure I'm responding to your questions.
Oh, absolutely. Because I also wanted to know, yeah, like where do you start with someone? I wanted to get more understanding of like how exactly, like let's say I'm a new client coming to you with, issues around depression,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
body image stuff,
Okay.
because you're referencing some of that. So you would ask me a bunch of questions
Mhm.
about my history and my relationship with my body and food and different things, and probably my past experiences with therapy and this, that, and the other, what's worked and not worked. And then where would you go from there?
Yep. Exactly. So then what we're going to talk about is we're going to explore the various aspects of metabolic health and try to figure out which one and I'll talk to you since you just presented yourself as coming to see me. So which of these areas do you feel most able to start? So the different areas of metabolic health include, I mentioned them earlier, I include water, light, circadian rhythms, food, what's going on with your breath work, your nervous system regulation, those kinds of things. And if someone's coming in presenting primarily with depression and a history of food concerns, we'll probably start there. But even if that's where we're going to start, we need to start from a perspective of where can you make changes without having this feel like it's just one more diet. This is not about, it's not one more diet. I always, from a first session on, I'm immediately starting to teach nervous system regulation. I'm certified in heart math. I find heart math to be really great because it's very simple and straightforward. You don't have to get the app to do it. There's a lot of stuff online about heart math. It's all about bringing your mind and your heart into coherence. And you can do it in 5 minutes, which I love. So it's attainable. So the first step I'm always going to take with someone is teach some basic skills about nervous system regulation. And then I'm going to explore the food journal they sent in. I'm going to explore their macros. I'm going to explore what might be some areas that they want to consider making some adjustments. Usually we'll start from a small perspective, especially if they're coming to me for therapy. Folks that come to me for health coaching, it might be a little bit of a different approach. But if someone's coming in for mental health therapy and they want to really look at a metabolic approach, I'm going to start there.
Hmm. So you mentioned the term macros. Does that mean macronutrients? What is that referencing?
Yeah, sorry, I move into short things. Macronutrients. So the three main macronutrients are protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And so what I'll do, there's a couple of apps, they're free. There's a couple of apps I recommend. Carb Manager and Chronometer are the two that come to mind. And I'll suggest they put that on their phone. And just like when they're first coming to see me, I tell them, don't try to adjust anything. Just observe for 3 days. It doesn't even have to be 3 days in a row. Just pick 3 days and enter the food that you do. And then we look at what their macros look like, and then we make adjustments from there.
Got it. Now, do you ever have your clients go and get blood work or, get like some sort of testing, to check different levels of things in the body, like the way you might check the thyroid and
Mhm.
or the whatever, blood sugar issues, liver functioning, things like that.
Yes, there's two situations that I always I can't make someone get it, but I really will strongly stress it. First of all, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I always really let people know that I describe, I don't prescribe. And I'm here to support you, and I'm here to provide you with the information and learn so that you can learn. I also work very closely with their own provider if they're seeing either a psychiatrist or a PCP for ongoing reasons. So the two situations where I really will ask someone to get some blood work done is if they're on any kind of medications that are directly related to blood sugar and mental health. I really want them to get some blood testing done. And the second one is if they're coming to me as a health coach and they're trying to deal with a certain health condition, or they want to stop taking, with mental health, if they want to stop taking mental health medication, I always work with their psychiatrist or their prescriber. And if they're coming to see me as a health coach, I'm going to work with them around working with their PCP about what's going on with them physically, because so that they make sure, and I have communication that they can send to their PCP to say, look, this is what I'm doing. I want you to be aware of this. This is the approach I'm doing. It's not some fly by night thing. It's grounded in research, and my provider is available to talk to you if you have questions. And so those are the two situations where I do ask them, and I might, depending on what they're presenting with, I might ask them to get blood tests around definitely their A1C. If they're on anything like that affects blood sugar, any of the GLP-1s, which are the weight loss drugs right now, or if they're on anything related to diabetes, they really need to be working very closely with a doctor, an MD. I won't work with someone with their nutrition unless if I have that communication, because when you start working with blood sugar stuff, it can really impact with those.
Yeah. And it's so nuanced and complex, right? Like I'm thinking back to a client that I worked with, doing therapy and doing mind body energetic psychology, energy psychology approaches, and depression was her primary issue, and it was like no amount of therapy was able to really move the needle to her feeling less depressed. And finally I was like, look, can you just go to your doctor and just get blood work done? Because she was, she thought she was someone in good health. She didn't see a reason to have to go to the doctor for anything. I mean, she was in her 30s, young woman. And sure enough, she goes and gets the blood work, and like a million and one things are out of whack. The vitamin D is low, the thyroid is not functioning correctly. And she wanted to take a more sort of natural approach. So she was put on supplements, more supplements than pharma, type medication. And guess what? Her depression went away. After a year of therapy, got us, some important places, but did not alleviate her original presenting issue. So important for people to understand too that different medical, more what we might call medically based conditions can also have mental health symptoms. Can you say a little bit about that? What we would call mental health symptoms, depression, anxiety, whatever, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's like so great that was your suggestion, that they go get blood work done, because there's a lot of medical conditions that can be directly lead to mental health challenges, let's say. So things like mold exposure, and other environmental toxins, those are huge. Nutritional allergies. So if someone has a gluten intolerance to gluten or dairy, those are the two most common, but a lot of grains and a lot of seed oils. So like those, Lyme disease that I know that you're familiar with, other kinds of, heavy metals. I worked with someone, Mark Hyman, who's very well known in the functional medicine space. He struggled with heavy metal poisoning after eating what seemed like a very healthy diet of a lot of fish, right? So heavy metal poisoning. So there's a lot of different things, that medical concerns that show up as struggles with even the more complex mental health struggles like schizophrenia and psychosis can be addressed with getting metabolically healthy. Actually, the original research with my approach came from an inpatient psychiatric hospital working with people with severe, persistent mental illness who were not responsive to the medications of the time. And they found there was an amazing success rate with folks doing a different way of eating.
Wow.
And that was specific to the ketogenic way of eating, I want to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so fascinating. And I do want to bring in the concept of gut health because I think that is so key to looking at what we call mental health. I mean, my understanding is now science is recognizing that we produce more serotonin and other neurotransmitters in our gut than in our brain, where their focus has been. You know, for most of the history of psychiatry. Um, Gut health, and I'm even thinking about like yeast overgrowth, like candida, and the impact that that can have on depression and brain fog and all these things, because that was the for me with the Lyme disease, heavy metal toxicity, multiple chemical sensitivities, and candida, systemic candida infection was a big part of what came with the Lyme, right? Because, you know, yes, it's if you're being attacked by a bacteria, your immune system is activated, but then it affects every other system and function as well, right? So it gets very complicated, and I those were things I dealt with. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I'm even thinking specifically about your history of working with addiction, because I think I'm involved in working at a drug and alcohol rehab, and I feel like this is where we have room for growth too, is looking at this stuff because we haven't brought it in. But how many people's digestive tracts and guts are wrecked by chronic alcoholism or even food addiction when they're eating sweets all the time? What does that do to someone's gut health, and then how does that impact their mental health?
Exactly. So the microbiome, I think the more we learn about the microbiome, the more I'm excited about our world of mental health. Because, they are calling the gut the second brain. That's been for a little while now. There's a whole new medical field specialization called neurogastroenterology. Like, how cool is that? I mean, I'm not in favor of all of the different breaking down of all the different medical specialties, but if they're going to keep doing it, I'm glad they're having a good one. Like, neurogastroenterology, right? The direct connection between our brain and our gut. And it's a bi-directional communication. So if the villi in your intestine, which are supposed to be up like this, so that all of the nutrients passing by can be absorbed to the best capacity, if they're shut down like this, you're not absorbing anything. And so you're not fueling your brain correctly. So if we're not fueling our body, and our microbiome ideally is seeded at birth, and it comes from our mother primarily, and through the birth canal and then through breastfeeding. And yet, even if all of those things are going right, so to speak, we have really done a number on our environment. And the nutrients that used to be available in our soil are not there. So even if we're eating in a very healthy way, even if we're eating very clean types of food, we're not necessarily getting the nutrients we need to fuel a very strong gut microbiome. And then we're also just the things that we're taking in that our bodies were not made. Our bodies just don't recognize so many. I mean, when I work with someone and they're trying to adjust their food, if they can just start with getting processed foods out of their eating, they can just start eating whole foods, like real food, like real, like something. If your grandmother doesn't recognize the words on the label, I kind of think if you're reading the labels to begin with, you're already in the wrong aisle, which might seem kind of extreme, but you don't see ingredients on, a chicken leg. It's like there's a chicken leg, right? So there's that about the microbiome, is that we really need to be learning about how to feed it correctly so that it can then send the correct nutrients into our body, fuel our brain in a way that the brain is functioning on all cylinders, so to speak.
Right.
Your
And then
question,
again, oh,
okay,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking about what you had asked about addictions,
Oh,
but
go
I
ahead.
did.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So there are a few treatment centers that are starting to recognize the importance of metabolic health. I had a friend in London who was in 12-step program, and she said in 12-step program, they always in London, they would tell people to carry Mars bars. I had to ask her. She'd said it like three different times. I was like, Eva, what is a Mars bar? And she said Mars bars. I don't even know if they make those anymore. But they would always tell people carry a chocolate bar in your bag, because if you have a craving to drink, you eat the candy and it will go away. And it's really interesting because that's very basic, right? But on a scientific level, sugar behaves in the brain very much like alcohol. And so when a lot of people will switch to sugar, I've worked in the addictions field a long time, and I watch people that will switch addictions and will struggle with whether it's sugar or whether it's just the act of eating, and that can be a real struggle. And obviously, if we look at it from a harm reduction point of view, alcohol, if you're not drinking, yay, bottom line, if you're not drinking. And yet, folks that the treatment centers that are using it, there's actually one based right here outside of Madison, where I am. I'm back in Wisconsin. And there's a couple, there's one out in Montana. They're using a ketogenic approach. And what they're finding is that if someone can get off sugar, the cravings just drop. And so it works if they can, because it can be a struggle in early recovery. But even learning that that's an option, that is very powerful.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that because you're right. I've totally observed that. The brain requires a ton of glucose. It requires sugar to function. And if you're not like eating properly, if you're not eating enough, if you're like waiting too long in between meals, your brain, especially if it's used to getting sugar from alcohol, it might start craving alcohol when really what it's asking for is fuel. Like I need fuel for my brain, and I know alcohol is quick and easy, and so it shows up as an alcohol craving. I've seen that with
Yeah.
folks for
And
sure.
it's interesting because people have asked me, Michelle, if I do your intensive 12-week program, can I drink? And I always, my first response is, you are an adult. You can do what you want. But when someone, and this is someone who's not drinking, right? Or who doesn't have, who drinks socially, however we'll name that. But what's true is that if a person drinks alcohol, the body and the brain will deal with that first before anything else. So if someone's going out for a meal and they have alcohol with the meal, before they get the nutrition from the meal, the body doesn't even look at that yet. It has to deal with the alcohol first. So it throws everything else off. And so and then I'll also, someone asked me this recently. They said, well, would I have to do that? And I said, well, what I ask is that you give me 12 weeks. You're really giving you 12 weeks, and give yourself 12 weeks to really do this thing. In which case, I'm going to suggest you don't drink for the 12 weeks, knowing full well it's your choice. But if you really find that you can't stop drinking for 12 weeks, we might be having another conversation.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
exactly.
direct about that.
Well, and I think too, another piece that's not getting addressed in addiction treatment is that the overgrowth of candida, if you have got, and which is systemic, it's not just a vaginal, people need to understand that, right? Like you can get like chronic recurring yeast infections that are not localized to like a specific part of your body, but that are systemic. It's like there's too much yeast in the gut, and it can be in the small intestine, even with SIBO, right? Like all these different things, that in and of itself will create cravings. That will create sugar cravings. It can create alcohol cravings because the yeast feed off the sugar. And so if you have an overgrowth of them, if your gut flora is imbalanced, right, this is where having healthy bacteria, like the probiotics and all that, if there isn't enough of that to contain the yeast, it overgrows, and then it's like feed me, feed me. I always like thought of it as a little Pac-Man, right? Like feed me, sugar, 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 right? And so people are getting these uncontrollable cravings for sugary treats, for alcohol, and I feel like that's not necessarily getting addressed in addiction treatment either. Is like helping people rebalance their gut flora. You know,
Yes. I think that's really important. One of the folks that I follow, Dr. Sean O'Mara, he talks about reseeding the microbiome through ferments. So fermented vegetables, whether that's kimchi or sauerkraut, fermented sauerkraut, not just pickled, fermented vegetables. He teaches people how to ferment things. Um, Kefir is a great source of ferments, and that really eating those fermented substances helps reseed the microbiome. And so if you look at my refrigerator right now, I probably have 12 different types because I get them from different, I look around. I love looking for a new provider of fermented vegetables, because each one of them has a slightly different twist on the microbes. And so you're allowing your gut to get, like, the gut will really love those microbes. People start when I've worked with people and I get really happy when they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm craving my kimchi." Because cravings are a lot of times your gut telling you it needs something. So if we've been eating a lot of sugar, then we're going to have cravings for sugar because the gut's like, hey, I need more. And when we can shift that and start and feeding our microbiome healthy things, the gut says, hey, I want me some more of that. And so we have different cravings. It's so cool.
So that's really what it sounds like the 12-week program that you offer folks is. It's in a sense like a metabolic reset.
It really is. That's what I call it. Yeah, you nailed it. Because it is really taking where you are today. And for some people, it's making tweaks. And for other people, it's really making some big shifts. And whether I'm working with someone individually or in a group setting, but primarily I'm doing things individually right now because it's more labor intensive for me, but it's also more, I can individualize it a lot more directly to that person. And so what they're doing when they're figuring out during their 12 weeks is I'm offering them support. The two things that I really work on with people is, first of all, I want them to know why they're working with me, why they're here, what is their why. And the second is I work with them to build a support network beyond me. I'm absolutely there to answer questions and to support them. But what I have found is that folks that they know their reasons, they know their why, and they know they have the people around them even if there's one person that's going to a dinner engagement, because social stuff is the hardest when it comes to food. If there's one person, and this is same with it in the addictions field, right? Is that if they have those social connections, then they're going to be a lot more confident in their ability to get through the evening and stay with what their goals are. If they're clear on their why, they're going to figure out their how. And if they have the support, that's going to go a long way towards success.
For sure. It's such powerful work. It's really exciting. I'm really happy to hear that you and others are coming around to this more integrative way of healing and how important, how much more beyond mental and brain the well-being our well-being really extends. So I've been super grateful for our conversation today. Michelle, if people want to find out more about your work or reach out to you, how do they do that?
They can go right to my website. It's www.michellepito.com. And I'm also on Psychology Today. I'm licensed in a couple of different states, so they can find me on Psychology Today. My socials are out there, but I think the best way to find me is to directly connect with me through my website. And also, you'd have a chance to learn more about the work that I do.
Yes, and we will definitely include that in the show notes as well for anyone who's listening or watching. There should be in the show notes links to Michelle's website, and I know you're working on a book, so I can't wait to see when that comes out. I think that'll be fantastic. Any final thoughts for us today before we leave this wonderful conversation?
I just really feel strongly about letting people know that healing's available. I work with so many people who come in after trying all sorts of different approaches, and they feel so frustrated and so much there's shame, and that I don't know what's wrong. I'm doing all the things. And what I love is when they realize I help them learn that they were doing all the things that they were told. What breaks my heart is when they were told things that are missing a piece of what they needed to learn. And then it's really exciting when they learn what those pieces are. And I'm like within just a few short weeks, I've seen people, they'll come in and they'll say, I cannot believe it, but my food chatter is gone. Or I slept through the night last night. Or I actually enjoyed doing something that I haven't enjoyed for so long. Like, it doesn't take all that long. It's very exciting. So that's the strongest message I want to give people, is that healing is available, and there's so many different things that we can tweak and try to figure out in the whole biohacking approach, really.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom and the gifts of you and the work that you're doing. It's really been tremendous. Um, Thank you so much, audience, for tuning in. If you have liked this episode, please do share it, comment, subscribe, rate, all the things that will help get the information out there to more people. And we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities.
And thank you so much for your great work that you're doing. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.